Unlike last year, which I think I was in the chair for as well, and we started 20 minutes late, we have been a bit more timely this year. Secretary General, Sir Ron Sanders, members of Sonny Ramphele's family, and the family of Patsy Robertson, of course, ladies and gentlemen. It's an unexpected pleasure for me to chair this lecture again this year, and indeed this afternoon, and only because, very sadly, our association's chair, Max Gaillard, suffered a family bereavement a few weeks ago and had to return to Australia. I know how sorry he is not to be here, and of course our thoughts are with him and with his family. But we are very glad that Maduri is here, so that's lovely. I think those of us who were present in the Queen's Chapel this morning for the memorial service will have felt especially privileged. And I think we'll look back over the years on today and be so pleased that we were here and that we as a Commonwealth have commemorated such an important figure in the Commonwealth's Hall of Fame. And of course, this afternoon is a continuation of that commemoration with the very able help of Sir Ron Sanders. And Secretary General, I want to thank you and indeed all your Secretariat colleagues for the wholehearted support that you have given. And so I think it's very fitting that my first duty will be to call upon the Secretary General, Shirley Botchway, to make a few opening introductory remarks.
Chair, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues. It is one of the great privileges of my role to welcome remarkable people to Marlborough House, and this afternoon is no exception. As Secretary General, my focus is on the strength and purpose of our Commonwealth family at a time of unprecedented fragmentation, uncertainty, and danger. But in seeking direction for now and the future, we are guided by the past. Because time and again, when it has mattered most, the Commonwealth has stood together, united in principle and in purpose. The Patsy Robertson Memorial Lecture was established to honor those who shaped that legacy, because Patsy was one of them. I never had the privilege of knowing her, but I count myself fortunate to be part of a Commonwealth that she helped to shape, and a world made better by her life and her service. With warmth and grace, with clarity and conviction, she rose through the ranks to become a person of profound influence and deep respect. She was, I'm told, trusted by diplomats, by politicians, by the royal household, and admired by all who met her. Her diplomacy was skillful, subtle, and steadfast. And in the long struggle against apartheid, she played a critical role, working alongside the Secretary General we honor tonight, Sir Sonny Ramphele. Sir Sonny was a giant of our Commonwealth. He served for 15 years with vision, compassion, and fierce moral clarity. He built bridges in times of division. He gave voice to the vulnerable and helped to rally the world against apartheid. His legacy is not just a chapter in our history. It is the foundation on which so much of our Commonwealth identity still rests today. He's an example to me, an inspiration to us all, and a reminder of the power of hope, unity, and principled leadership. Tonight, after a day when we have mourned his passing and celebrated his extraordinary life, we are privileged to be joined by his son-in-law, Sir Ronald Sanders. Sir Ronald is himself a great servant of the Commonwealth, a diplomat of distinction. He has twice served as High Commissioner of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Kingdom, as ambassador to the World Trade Organization, and for the past decade, as ambassador to the United States and the OAS. He brings with him not only a wealth of personal and professional insight, but the authority of someone who knew Sir Sonny well. There's no one better placed to deliver this lecture. And I, like all of us, am eager to hear what you have to say. Sir Ronald, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And I think it's 3 months to the day since you assumed office. And we know that you will be writing a new chapter in the Commonwealth's history. And I'm sure you have the support of everybody in this room in that endeavor. Of course, we cannot forget and should not forget and would not want to forget that this lecture is a commemoration of one of those who in her exemplary service to the Commonwealth was a key lieutenant of Sonny Ramphal for all his tenure, Patsy Robertson. And I want to now turn to someone who was also one of Sonny's key advisors and workers in that respect, Hugh Craft, who was the director of what was then the International Affairs Division of the Commonwealth Secretariat, and therefore at the heart of many of those great causes that were referred to this morning. So I think there's no better person to introduce our guest lecturer, Sir Ronald than Hugh Craft, and I call on you to speak.
Stuart Mole, acting chair, and our commiserations to Max, and I hope they'll be passed on. His Excellency Sir Ronald Sanders, our guest speaker for today. Secretary General, welcome, and we wish you well. Excellencies, distinguished guests, and members of the Commonwealth Association, friends of the Commonwealth one and all. It's a great pleasure to be back in London and to be here in Marlborough House. Lots of memories. Here for almost a decade on the behest of Malcolm Fraser, of great fame and fortune, and in the familiar halls of Marlborough House, full of memories, working endless hours, trudging the corridors of this place, morning and afternoon, negotiating, heavy but happy, hard work, constant travel and advocacy, the changing fortunes of the Commonwealth, but always surrounded by highly talented colleagues, many of whom are here today, and in the presence of two great ones of our generation, Sonny Ramphal and Patsy Robertson. So it's great to be here today, and it is my very great pleasure to welcome on your behalf Sir Ronald Sanders as our guest speaker. But first of all, can I say through Ron, our very great thanks to the family and for being included in this commemoration this morning. It's something that others have said is unforgettable, and I'm sure that will be the case. I have known Ron Sanders now since the early mid 1980s. I don't think we'd ever regard ourselves as close buddies, but we've known one another and moved in the same friendly circle for all of those years. It was when he arrived as a High Commissioner to Antigua Barbuda here in London the first time. And so it was the heart of our work on Southern Africa, which was real work, the Falklands, the Grenada situation, and the development of the groundbreaking Commonwealth report on vulnerability in small states. Ron threw himself right from the beginning into all of those projects. And I don't want to recite his achievements today. We haven't got long enough for that. But what I want to say is a couple of things about Ron that I really admire. And they relate to his diplomatic style, the scope of his work and achievements and influence, his prolific commentary on foreign affairs, his enduring and lively support for the Commonwealth. And it's got to do with what he brings to the job and to the task of supporting the Commonwealth and to diplomacy. A multiplicity of skills, beginning with journalism and experience in business, academia, and politics. And the nature of his work in the practice of diplomacy. The multiplicity of these skills, but the everyday work of a day-to-day diplomat in Washington and Ottawa cannot be an easy task for someone representing a small island state. His diplomatic experience and work extending into the Caribbean and Latin America, and the subsequent dealing with global institutions and on global matters of importance. Rarely it is these days that the diplomat, who is essentially a public servant of his country, called upon to engage upon so widely and so deeply and so heavily in the affairs of state, which Ron clearly is. A great compliment from his government over the years. A major recognition of Ron's work in the Commonwealth was in 2010, when he was appointed as a member of the Eminent Persons Group to look into the future of the Commonwealth and how it might be strengthened and reshapen. And it was this recognition by leaders of his energy and his broad knowledge of the central issues concerned to the Commonwealth that brought him to that point. He said at the outset that he wanted to see a Commonwealth and an EPG that talked about a bold set of proposals that would introduce ordinary people to the Commonwealth. Well, they certainly did. And this was in the adoption of the Commonwealth Charter in Perth in 2011. That document that set a new standard and new expectations and new ambitions of the Commonwealth. Ron's contribution to this project was simply immense, not just in the writing of the report and the research that went into that, but in this report coming to the CHOGM and it being adopted by the CHOGM in Perth. And the work was immense in terms of the charter that was adopted, which set new ways of doing things and a higher standard than before. And I might say this work was done by Ron in close association with the Australian High Court Judge, Mr. Justice Michael Kirby. And equally, I'm very pleased to say that the Australian government awarded Ron the Order of Australia in recognition of his service to this significant landmark of achievement in the Commonwealth. Back in 2015, when Ron was a candidate for Secretary General, his own Prime Minister said of him that Ronald Sanders is a man of vision, a man of ideals, and a man of ideas, a man proven to be totally committed to the Commonwealth. And in this world, divided as never before, certainly in our lifetime, we need people like Ron to stand up in support of the Commonwealth and in association with the Commonwealth Association, which stands exactly for that, bringing the thoughts and the ideas and the intelligence and the experience of people like ourselves who've worked at high levels in the Commonwealth and people like Ron who are still already and still active in the world of the Commonwealth out there to make their contribution. Because multilateralism is no doubt under severe attack. And the multilateral presence of the Commonwealth as a unique institution will be an important factor, I believe, in helping the world to find itself. So we should be truly privileged today to welcome Sir Ronald to our platform. as our distinguished guest. And on this day, when we equally celebrate the life and contribution of Sonny to the world of Commonwealth affairs and international affairs, we remember the remarkable person of Patsy in all of her activities and achievements in the Commonwealth. So please join me in welcoming Sir Ronald Sanders today to speak to us on the legacy of Sonny Ramphal. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hugh. Susan, remember when I die, he used to do my tribute. I've already seen the script I approve. These are not tears. These are my eyes, which I've got some kind of thing that causes it to water, and there's little I can do about it. A few hours ago, in the Queen's Chapel, serene and sanctified, a stately Thanksgiving service honored the distinguished life of Sir Sridath Sonny Ramphal, the second and longest serving Commonwealth Secretary General. We were right to give thanks for his remarkable life, in which he provided courageous and creative leadership to the Commonwealth, a Commonwealth to which he was passionately and unreservedly committed. Were he physically here this evening, he would have been delighted to see so many friends with whom he shared a common bond to make the Commonwealth serve not just itself, but all the world. And it is he who would have thanked you for keeping faith with him in life and in parting. So I thank those who joined us for the service of Thanksgiving and all who are gathered here at Marlborough House, the seat of the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the very workshop where diverse perspectives, open dialogue, and the free exchange of ideas have shaped Commonwealth thinking. I begin formally by acknowledging Her Excellency, the Honorable Shirley Botchway, our current Commonwealth Secretary General, to whom I express profound gratitude for her personal assistance and that of the Secretariat in arranging both this morning's memorial service and today's lecture. It is especially fitting that a Ghanaian holds this post in the 60th anniversary year of the founding of the Commonwealth Secretariat, which we mark this month. Ghana's visionary president, Kwame Nkrumah, first proposed the idea of a Commonwealth Secretariat in July of 1965. It came to fruition a year later. From Nkrumah's bold proposal to Botchway's stewardship, we mark 60 years of vision made real. We honor that vision and we celebrate the accomplishment. And so we gather for the annual memorial lecture in honor of Patsy Robertson, an indomitable Commonwealth figure in her own right, as you have heard both from Stuart and from you, both of whom worked with her closely. Patsy was the founding spirit and the first chair of this Commonwealth Association. Her belief in the Commonwealth was unshakable, and her passion for promoting its relevance unwavering. She led the Secretariat's public information efforts for many years, and behind the scenes served as the private, trusted voice of the Secretariat in its dealings with media across the Commonwealth nations. She patiently explained policies, offered background briefings that advanced Commonwealth cohesion, and underscored our shared values. When she died in August of 2020, Sir Sridath Ramphal paid her this tribute. He said, "The Commonwealth sky has clouded over." She had given her life to the Commonwealth from the Secretariat's beginning to her own end. May the Commonwealth fulfill the highest purposes to which she dedicated her life. Patsy would have been the first to approve focusing this year's lecture on the man she served and admired for 15 years. So Sridhar Sunny Ramphal, his life, his leadership, and the lessons we draw from his legacy are the purposes of today's lecture. And it is a profound privilege for me to have been asked to deliver it, focusing on lessons from the legacy of Sir Sridhar Ramphal as Secretary General. In the 10 months since his passing, I have been invited to write and speak on several occasions about his life and legacy. While I have done so, not once have I felt able to capture that life and that legacy fully. For his pursuits and accomplishments surpassed what most could have achieved in a single lifetime. He was a Guyanese loyalist, a Caribbean patriot, a Commonwealth devotee, and a confirmed internationalist. And in each of these spheres, he made outstanding contributions. Malcolm Fraser, the former Prime Minister of Australia, said of Sunny, "He understood the principles which were important to the strength and unity of the Commonwealth. He made sure the Commonwealth adhered to those principles. He is a man among men." So let's look for a moment at Sunny Ramphal, the man behind the statesman. His life was one foretold, in a way both special and quietly prophetic. In 1929, just before his first birthday, a moment occurred that seemed to foreshadow the remarkable life ahead. The Reverend C.F. Andrews, a close disciple and trusted friend of Mahatma Gandhi, visited British Guyana at Gandhi's request. During his visit, he found himself in the humble home of Sunny's parents, James and Grace Ramphal. There, the infant Sunny, restless and unsettled, caught his eye. The Reverend Andrews lifted up the child, gazed into his eyes, and declared with certainty, "This child will have a long and rewarding life." And so it proved to be. From these modest beginnings, Sir Sridhar Ramphal rose to touch the lives of nations and inspire millions. Born on October 3rd, 1928, in a British Guyana still bound by the chains of colonialism, he would come to embody a profound commitment to justice, fairness, and most importantly, hope. Though I knew him personally and intimately as his son-in-law for 50 years, that's 50 years, a long time, and professionally as Antigua and Barbuda's High Commissioner to London and ambassador in other theaters, I found in preparing this lecture that I was still amazed by all that he had achieved in a single lifetime. He received the highest honors from 21 individual countries and from 15 Caribbean community nations collectively, as well as honorary degrees from 28 universities, including Oxford, London, Cambridge. He also served as Chancellor of 3 universities, the University of Guyana, the University of the West Indies, and the University of Warwick, spending over a decade at both UWI and Warwick. Never content with a ceremonial title, as Chancellor of these universities, he quietly enriched every council meeting with his legal expertise and global experience, always very respectful of the Vice Chancellor, not to usurp the Vice Chancellor's duties, but to aid him in carrying them out. Exceptionally, he was the only person to serve on all 4 of the major international commissions of the 1980s that helped shape global discourse and policy on development and cooperation, on environment, on sustainability, and on disarmament and security, and then yet on humanitarian issues as well. And all this while being an active and involved Secretary General of the Commonwealth. Where did he find the energy, stamina, and dedication to work diligently and to excel in every forum? Well, it was in his character. A fierce urgency to make change for the better, always driven to ensure that progress would reach the greatest number and that progress would endure. All those who labored with him knew of his capacity to work late into the night, only to emerge the following morning with a draft of a solution to the previous day's seemingly insurmountable issue. Words have weight, he said, time and again. Weigh the use of each one carefully. They make a huge difference to outcomes. He told me that time and again as a diplomat. He also told me this: never refuse the pen. Whenever something is to be drafted, make sure that you take the pen. You take the pen, you draft the structure. And that was an important lesson I've carried throughout my life. I have never refused to draft a communique, draft a statement, draft a resolution, or draft a declaration, because you shape it from the very start. People can tinker with the edges. They can suggest a nuance here and a nuance there, but the structure remains in place. That care and unyielding dedication ensured that every initiative he championed delivered broad, lasting impact and stood the test of time. Now, the work of those 4 global commissions on which he served all still resonate today, almost 3 decades later. Witness the erosion of the rules-based order now and the UN Security Council's paralysis in preventing aggression and upholding international peace and security. But of all of his commissions, which moved governments from division to consensus and common sense, none is more relevant to today's Commonwealth than the Commission on Environment and Development. Though there are deniers, climate change poses the greatest threat to all mankind. The Commonwealth small island states feel its first and fiercest blows, but its impacts are now unmistakable across every continent. In all of these commissions, whose members brought diverse and often conflicting perspectives, Sonny carried this unique gift for which he was well known: the ability to reconcile even the most hostile approaches. Those recognitions affirmed his status as a true global citizen, admired for his unique contributions to humanity. In his work, he personified the quality of a healing touch. He aspired for this Commonwealth to embody that same healing spirit, a lesson he drew from Jawaharlal Nehru, who at India's independence believed that the country needed a healing touch and a secular policy of reconciliation among its many faiths. It was that same healing touch that moved him in 1989 to encourage Benazir Bhutto, the young new leader of Pakistan, to seek re-entry into the Commonwealth after a 12-year absence, and to urge Rajiv Gandhi, India's equally youthful leader, to welcome her initiative. In doing so, Sonny succeeded in bringing back into the modern Commonwealth 2 of its founding members, neighbors who were instrumental in its creation. But, as he said in 2009, in words that still ring true today, the Commonwealth's work in this area is by no means done. Contentious issues rooted in historical circumstances persist. But the Commonwealth and its Secretariat cannot afford to remain distant from disputes between its member states. Without fanfare or proclamation, the Commonwealth must always be ready to apply its healing touch, to help resolve conflicts, and to sustain the peace on which human progress depends. That was a point on which Sonny was clear. And he said in 1985, one of the functions of the Commonwealth is not to displace the United Nations, but to help the United Nations to realize its goals by keeping the lines of communication open. That was integral to his often repeated mantra that while the Commonwealth cannot negotiate for the world, it can help the world to negotiate. The question then arises, and it is one that supporters of the Commonwealth should not avoid: can the Commonwealth truly help the world to negotiate? This question, and one that supporters must confront, cuts to the very purpose of the Commonwealth. David Lawrence, writing a commentary for Chatham House, recently observed, and I'll quote him, "The Commonwealth's breadth, rich and poor, north and south, ethnically diverse, makes it more interesting than many other multilateral bodies such as the G7, NATO, and the European Union." Yet he faults the Commonwealth for, and again I quote him, "an unclear purpose," and argues that its diversity, and again I quote him, "its diversity means consensus is often impossible on global issues." However, with the greatest respect to David Lawrence, his narrow view ignores 76 years of voluntary association among Commonwealth nations and the cooperation, collaboration, and shared effort that have yielded real positive results. Consensus will not follow on every matter, no more so than when the Commonwealth united to end racism and apartheid in Southern Africa. But who today doubts that we did the right thing? Who questions the courageous stand taken by Black, brown, and white Commonwealth countries against an egregious evil? Yet, yes, we must attend to trade, we must attend to aid, we must attend to migration, we must attend to the circumstances in which the Commonwealth finds itself in the world, but never at the expense of our most vital attribute, representing the people of almost 1/3 of the United Nations. We have a responsibility to help them fulfill their aspirations, especially now, as powerful states undermine the rules-based trading system, tighten migration controls, restrict multilateral aid, and retreat from collective cooperation. Our voluntary bond has never been more important than it is now. We must recall that the Commonwealth is not a treaty-bound cartel. It is a voluntary association, rooted for the most part in shared history and legal traditions. Each member pursues its own aspirations, yet all of them recognize challenges that are common: climate change, pandemics, transnational crime. None of these are issues that any one nation can confront alone. If Sonny were here, he would say without hesitation that this is why the Commonwealth remains vital. That is its true purpose: to take the road least walked to find solutions from which all humanity can advance. And it is not just about governments. More than 90 non-governmental organizations representing millions subscribe to that idea, working daily across human rights, law, health, education, sustainable development, and youth engagement. The Commonwealth is indeed intergovernmental cooperation, but above all, it is a living bond between people, united by common ideals and a shared commitment to a better world. Sonny Ramphal rejected the notion of a Secretary General as a silent clerk. He was once accused of being more general than secretary. I think he wore that epithet as a badge of honor. To him, it was an activist platform, the Secretary General's job. It was an activist platform to launch bold ideas that empowered heads of government to change the world. At the same time, he knew the value of alliances. He built trust across white, black, and brown leadership. So his initiatives would carry genuine weight, yet he never lost sight of the office's formal limits. When New Zealand's Prime Minister Robert Muldoon bristled at Sonny's push to enforce the 1977 Gleneagles Agreement against apartheid, calling him more general than secretary, it crystallized that tension. Muldoon expected a neutral administrator. He found instead a principled campaigner, faithful always to the principles of the Commonwealth. That balance between daring initiative and deference to mandate defined Sonny's tenure. He wielded every tool to ensure that the Commonwealth spoke with moral clarity while preserving unity through patient, judicious coalition building. It was a lesson he taught me personally in my own diplomatic life. On every occasion that I talked to him about some initiative that I wanted to take in organizations in which I've served as ambassador, the first question he asked me was, have you built the support? Key question. You cannot progress in any organization without building the alliances. When Sonny Ramphal arrived at Marlborough House in 1975, he carried a vision that stretched far beyond Britain's old Commonwealth. Over the next 15 years, longer than his predecessors or successors so far, he reshaped the Commonwealth into a genuine moral voice. Above all, he believed that the Commonwealth must remain true to its ideals, and he lived that conviction through three core commitments: ending racism and institutionalizing social justice, equitable development, and principled multilateralism. He guided the Commonwealth through the final stages of decolonization in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, always insisting that the rights of newly independent states be respected and their special circumstances be addressed. He sensed the mounting threat to our planet long before it entered the public conscience, championing environmental stewardship when few would listen. For Sonny, the Secretariat was far more than a bureaucracy. It was an intellectual hub worthy of helping the world negotiate its future. To prove it, he attracted the brightest minds to Marlborough House, some of whom are in this room right now. Some are here physically. I am damn sure many others are here in spirit. Then between 1984 and 1990, he institutionalized expertise on the era's defining challenges. After the 1983 US intervention in Grenada, he commissioned a study on small states' vulnerability that reshaped discussions at the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. In 1984, he brought together scholars from Ghana, India, and Barbados and produced the Commonwealth Study on Debt and Development, which directly influenced the World Bank's 1985 Structural Adjustment Program. A 1987 environmental assessment led by experts from Australia, Canada, and Jamaica laid the groundwork for small island developing states at the 1992 Earth Summit. And in 1998, under Martin Holgate's chairmanship, the expert group on global warming issued one of the earliest international warnings about sea level rise, foretelling what we now recognize as climate change bearing down disproportionately on the world's poorest people. Through every initiative, Sonny's guiding faith was in the oneness of humanity. He rejected any notion of otherness or racial superiority. He insisted that so long as we honored our shared ideals, the Commonwealth could help the world negotiate a fairer, more sustainable future. His legacy challenges to match his intellectual rigor and moral clarity as we confront a new age of global conflicts and economic uncertainty. This morning in the chapel, those of you who were there heard a most remarkable exposition on Sonny's role in what was then Southern Rhodesia and later became Zimbabwe, and in the fight against apartheid. As Emeka Anyoko was recounting those things, I myself had a recollection that I had forgotten up until he started talking. And that is that when the African leaders of ZAPU and ZANU fighting to get rid of the minority government of Ian Smith and to try to establish the principle of one man, one vote, those late night conversations that advised those leaders' approach to that Lancaster House meeting, dominated by Lord Carrington, the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary of Britain, who had his own fixed ideas about how that conference should end. Those meetings took place in Sonny Ramphal's study, ma'am, in the house that you now occupy at 40B Hill Street. They were late night conversations. And I don't believe that the African leaders who themselves came to grief later, unfortunately, and in whose hands the future of Zimbabwe laid, doubted for a moment the value of the advice that he gave to them. Now, Sonny's lineage embodied the Commonwealth's complex history, and it helped to advise what he did in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa. He was the descendant of an enslaved African woman and her white slave owner on one branch of his family, and of Indian indentured laborers on the other. You couldn't get more mixed than that. But he knew racism, exploitation, and injustice firsthand. So when he took office as Commonwealth Secretary General in 1975, confronting racism in Southern Africa was his natural first task. In 1977 at Ottawa, every head of government except the United Kingdom condemned Ian Smith's white minority regime in Southern Rhodesia. 2 years later in Lusaka, they united behind the demand for one person, one vote, forcing the Lancaster House Conference and paving the way for Zimbabwe's independence in 1980. All the while, Sonny stood firm against the iron will of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and her equally forceful Foreign Secretary, Lord Carrington. but drawing on his sharp legal mind and extraordinary negotiating skill, he guided African leaders toward an independence constitution, enshrining, at the very least, one man, one vote. That triumph toppled Ian Smith's regime and began restoring rights to Zimbabwe's native majority. Sonny lamented what followed under Robert Mugabe's repression of his own political opponents. He lamented Zimbabwe's suspension from the Commonwealth, and he wondered at the time whether a higher level of diplomatic engagement might have prevented Mugabe from taking his decision to withdraw Zimbabwe. He fundamentally believed, and I tell you this, fundamentally believed right up to the very end, that those tragedies sprang from broken promises. Britain's failure to fund land distribution for the landless majority and Mugabe's own shortcomings on governance. We must never forget that when Zimbabwe was born, 90% of the land was in the hands of less than 5% of the people. It was an injustice that needed to be righted. And unfortunately, that was the basket that Mugabe was given to carry water. Well, as Sonny put it, had the Commonwealth had the commitments made on land and governance been respected and fulfilled, Zimbabwe today would not be the casualty it is. Sonny's steadfast commitment to justice in Southern Africa sprang from personal experience and unshakable principle, a lesson that continues to guide and must continue to guide the Commonwealth today. From 1975 to 1990 as Secretary General, Sonny kept the Commonwealth's voice unyielding against South African apartheid, imposing travel bans, suspending sporting ties, and backing UN sanctions. In 1985, he established the now well-known Eminent Person Group and sent them to South Africa. Their report laid bare the regime's inhumanity and warned of graver suffering unless apartheid was dismantled. And it called for Nelson Mandela's unconditional release. Sonny published that report as a book. It became a bestseller and galvanized citizens' action worldwide. The Commonwealth galvanized citizen action worldwide. The following year, he published another report as a book. This was the sanctions report prepared for the Commonwealth Committee of Foreign Ministers on Southern Africa. In its introduction, that report made what would have been a startling statement at the time. This is what it said: exhortation will never end apartheid. Even diplomatic pressure will not be enough. Economic pressure will be needed before the white minority yields its monopoly on power. Nelson Mandela, from his prison cell, endorsed that statement. Sonny became the advocate for those sanctions, remarking this: human solidarity with the victims and opponents of apartheid in South Africa is what will ensure one day a free, non-racial, democratic society in South Africa, one in which all its peoples, Black and white, will dwell in freedom and peace. He forged alliances with leaders from Australia, Canada, India, and beyond, even as he clashed with Margaret Thatcher's government. His diplomatic acumen united white, Black, and brown heads of government around a common cause, hastening apartheid's demise. And the Commonwealth's role in this must never, ever be discounted. On the 11th of February, 1990, 2 years after the EPG mission, Nelson Mandela walked free, a triumph born of Commonwealth consensus. When Mandela arrived in London that April, Margaret Thatcher invited him to Downing Street, but his first call was not to the Prime Minister's residence. It was to Sonny's home, a home you now occupy at 40B Hill Street. And this group here, and were all were you born at India? No, maybe not. Yes, but certainly the children here were all delighted to have met this great man, in whose meeting he touched our lives so immensely that it an experience difficult ever to forget. I'll tell you one anecdote about that. When I met him in Sonny's house, I had not yet come back into the diplomatic service. So I had not yet started my second term as a High Commissioner to London. But in that term, Nelson Mandela became the president of South Africa. And Her Majesty the Queen had a reception for him at Windsor Castle, to which all of the diplomatic corps were invited. And because we, the High Commissioners of the Commonwealth, take precedence over all other ambassadors, much to the annoyance of the United States ambassador, and because it is in alphabetical order, I was the first person before Australia to be presented to Nelson Mandela. And I said to him as we shook hands, "I'm sure you don't remember me, Mr. President, but we met and I told him the circumstances." And his response was, "Thank you very much for remembering me." Now, Mandela later said of Sonny, he is one of those men who have become famous because in their fight for human justice, they have chosen the whole world as their theater. This was Sonny's Commonwealth in action, principled, proactive, and united in pursuing justice. Sonny placed great importance on Commonwealth heads of government's meetings, not merely convening them, but ensuring that heads wanted to attend and to find real value in their deliberations, not simply to come perfunctorily. You can't drag a head of government away from his duties, sometimes across the world, for something that does not have meaning. He understood that. He knew that these gatherings had to produce outcomes that strengthened member countries and served the world, remaining relevant and resident for people everywhere. To preserve focus and frank dialogue, he instituted the retreat mechanism, which had been introduced first by Pierre Trudeau in Ottawa 2 years before. But Sonny institutionalized it. A 2-day session, 2 days, for heads and the Secretary General alone, zeroing in on the most urgent issues, so that if they met today, for instance, what would they be talking about? First thing on the agenda would probably be President Trump's disruption of a rules-based trade organization. The second thing would be, are we on the verge of World War III? Do we not need a ceasefire in Palestine and in Gaza, and for the Israelis to stop their bombings? Do we not need the United States to think again about how we approach Iran? Are we playing with a fire? And does it not need careful diplomatic work? That probably is what heads of government would talk about. Now, some people would say, that's not a Commonwealth issue. But it is. And why is it? Because we are all touched by it. Every single Commonwealth country, big or small. Why would it touch a little country like mine? Because we need peace in the world. We need predictability in the world. We need people not to be fearful of getting on aeroplanes and flying to Antigua for a holiday. We need that confidence. We also need oil prices not to continue to skyrocket, because oil prices puts up the cost of everything, including our tourism. We need logistics to happen smoothly. We need shipping to flow smoothly so that we do not bear the cost of high prices reflected in the food that we eat and the construction materials that we buy. That's why it is important for us. And to each country, large or small, you will find a reason that is important to you for us to bring peace to the world and to end the madness that is going on in the Middle East. Now, that retreat mechanism, as I said, was extremely important. As membership of the Commonwealth grew, full plenaries became cumbersome and lost the candid spirit of earlier smaller meetings. The last CHOGM I attended, heads of government were reading speeches at each other in plenaries, not talking with each other, reading speeches at each other. Well, I've never seen reading speeches at each other solve a problem. What I have seen solve a problem is when people who can make decisions close the door, sit down together and say, let's talk this through. Where can we take this matter? Retreats are important to CHOGMs. In fact, if the rest of CHOGM never happened and all we had was a retreat, that would have been more than enough. In fact, it would have been far more productive. And incidentally, that was one of the recommendations that the second eminent persons group made. I happened to be on that group and I was a rapporteur of it, but it was a single idea on which there was no contention, not from Malcolm Rifkin, the former Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary of Britain, not from the former Chief Justice of Australia, not from a former senior senator of Canada, not from anyone. That was the agreed thing. We all knew that if CHOGMs were to retain their purpose and their attraction and their relevance, and if they themselves were to be relevant to the Commonwealth people, heads of government had to speak to each other, frankly, candidly, and without issuing long communiques that nobody read. Now, in my view, we should redouble our efforts, extending these retreats and keeping their agendas sharply current and urgent, as we did recommend in the Eminent Persons Group report, A Commonwealth of the People, Time for Urgent Reform. Consider the results, if you like, of 2 retreats, just 2, many more, but I'll just cite 2. In Ottawa in 1982, in 2 days, heads of government alone produced the Ottawa Declaration on Debt Relief and Development. It was a major breakthrough, and it became the foundation of every Commonwealth debt campaign since. In Nassau in 1985, a similar retreat forged together tougher sanctions on South Africa and new pledges for environmental cooperation among small states. Now, by owning these decisions, by owning them, leaders implemented them with swift resolution. It was their decisions. They wanted to see them implemented. They didn't come on a piece of paper from officials who'd spent 3 months arguing with each other. This was their decision, and therefore they implemented them. If we ask how Sunny helped the world to negotiate into concrete action, those retreats provided the answer. They show how the Commonwealth can shape global outcomes and offer a blueprint we must revive and apply today. Now, Sunny firmly believed the Commonwealth's authority rested on more than just shared history. It depended too on shared values, above all, human rights and democratic accountability. Long before the creation of any formal sanctions mechanism, such as the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group, CMAG, he used the retreat format at the 1977 CHOGM to urge heads of government to break new ground by condemning Idi Amin's inhumanities in Uganda I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember that. It was a daring move, directly challenging the cloak of non-interference that rogue regimes still hide behind today. They abuse their people, and when you say something about it, they say, my sovereign right, you cannot interfere in my internal affairs. Doesn't matter if they kill 1 million. The rest of the world is to stay silent. Well, Sonny Ramphal ensured that in Uganda, on the Idi Amin, Commonwealth heads of government did not remain silent. His insistence that we must be consistent transformed that communique into a powerful statement on principle and set a new benchmark for international accountability. He said after that particular meeting, heads must speak out in condemnation of what is regarded as tyranny, whether the origins were in a black or white leadership. Now, determined to move beyond ad hoc denunciations, Sonny secured at the 1981 CHOGM a mandate to establish a dedicated human rights unit within the Secretariat. We hadn't had one before. Launched in January 1985 with just one lawyer, it became the Commonwealth's first permanent mechanism for promoting and monitoring human rights across our membership, embedding rights protection at the very heart of our values. Under his watch, the Secretariat also launched its first Commonwealth election observation mission. It's routine today that we send people to observe elections. But in those days, it was a new idea and not one that was universally welcomed. But international observation elections in countries have brought a higher degree of integrity and accountability than it had before. It preserves the right of the people to choose a government by their own vote and by the majority. Under his watch, the Secretariat, well, I just said that. I won't repeat it. Well, in any event, today, we confront worrying signs of democratic backsliding everywhere in the world. It's not just in the Commonwealth. In the Organization of American States, and I witness every day backsliding of democracy. And it's happening in places that say they are the bedrock of democracy. I won't call any names, but I know if I asked you who, you would tell me. These, however, are issues we need to face up to and face up to them realistically. Now, I cannot leave Sonny's Commonwealth service without acknowledging two remarkable figures that he worked alongside. First, Britain's Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Their relationship was often cast as combative, and there were indeed profound differences between them, but never without mutual respect. And that's important to understand, never without mutual respect. When Sonny told Margaret Thatcher at Downing Street that he was planning to step down as Secretary General, her first response was these two words: must you? Must you? Later, at a private dinner that she hosted in his honor, she observed, and I'll read her exact words, "You and I have not always agreed, particularly on how best to address South Africa's very real problems, although we share the aim of ending apartheid. Yet even in our disagreement at CHOGMs, you always sought a constructive way to accommodate differences, and that has spared the Commonwealth itself any damage." Those words, spoken by one of the most formidable political leaders of the time, speak volumes about Sonny's diplomacy. The other figure was Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Sonny deeply admired the Queen, calling her role as head of the Commonwealth a supreme success and praising her excellence with which she fulfilled that role. While it is not proper to reveal private conversations with the Queen, I can say that she placed great confidence in Sonny's counsel on Commonwealth matters and often relied on it at challenging moments. Sonny also felt that residing the headship of the Commonwealth in the Sovereign of Britain as a symbol of the voluntary association of Commonwealth countries was wise and practical. As he put it, the formula's tenets, like those of a virtuous founding constitution, are a heritage to be preserved. As it turned out, Commonwealth heads of government decided to do just that. So now King Charles is ahead of the Commonwealth, seamlessly and without a problem. Sonny left the service of the Commonwealth in 1990. He was not yet 62. He had done all that and he was not yet 62. But he could not escape the call to service in global causes or in the Caribbean's interests and for the territorial integrity of his native Guyana. He became a member of the South Commission in 1990, chairman of the West Indian Commission from 1990 to 1992, president of the World Conservation Union from 1990 to 1993, co-chair of the Commission on Global Governance from 1992 to 2000, chairman of the Board of Directors of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance from 1995 to 2001, chief negotiator for the Caribbean Community External Relations 1997 to 2001, and much more besides. Now, I'm tired just reading it out. Can you imagine what he must have been doing it? How did he do these things at such a high level, tirelessly and unfailing in his diligence? Still remains to me a wonder. But that was the nature of the man. All who knew him, all these guys sitting in this room who worked with him, know that what I have just said is the truth. Now, even as he labored on the global stage, his heart remained in Guyana, his birthplace and his final resting place. His love for his homeland was unwavering, and he stood as its staunch defender against Venezuela's claim to 2/3 of its territory. Armed with that sharp legal mind, deep patriotism, and unyielding dedication, he guided Guyana through every twist and turn of this dispute. He was the last surviving member of the team that negotiated the 1966 Geneva Agreement between Venezuela, the United Kingdom, and then British Guyana, a framework for a peaceful legal resolution. Venezuela has never honored it. But Sonny's stature and integrity were such that even Venezuela acknowledged the creativity and wisdom that he brought to those delicate talks. Remarkably, and Amanda mentioned it today in the chapel, at 1992, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, he was 92. He became the first attorney to appear virtually before the International Court of Justice, representing Guyana on jurisdictional questions in the ongoing case. His faith in international law never wavered. On the evening before his brief illness, it was legal submissions on the ICJ case that he took to his bed. That is what we found him with the next morning. Now the ICJ is expected to rule on the Guyana-Venezuela controversy later this year. He did not live to see that decision. Yet, literally, to his dying breath, he labored for his country's sovereignty and territorial integrity to be respected. 3 decades on from Sonny's tenure, the Commonwealth confronts fresh trials, each striking at the values he cherished. Our world needs enlightened collective action now more than ever. It is only through cooperative international effort that we can show that invasions, wars, bombing, and the unraveling of the rules-based trading system are not the answers. The Commonwealth has an important role in addressing these issues. Sonny Ramphal's record stands as a proof of what principled leadership can achieve. He expanded the Commonwealth's relevance, forged consensus on the toughest issues, and gave voice to the unheard. He never doubted the Commonwealth's collective capacity to overcome injustice, inequality, and environmental peril. And neither should we. I end now by recalling that despite all the highest honors that were bestowed upon him by nations across the world, and all the honorary doctorates awarded to him by the world's leading universities, he remained an unassuming man with a broad and welcoming smile and immense charm. Two people today recall that to me. Professor Anthony Payne, who is a young undergraduate, professor now, as a young undergraduate, went to see Sonny on Caribbean issues. The other was Matthew Niehaus, who also remembered when his early days at the Commonwealth, talking to Sonny and being received and given all the time that he could possibly have wanted. He treated the persons he encountered everywhere with the same respect he accorded to kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers. He was genuinely loved and respected, as was testified to our family in hundreds of messages sent directly or posted on social media platforms on the news of his passing. I want you all to know that he died peacefully, with his children and grandchildren at his side. He loved and cared for all of them throughout his busy life. They shared him with the Commonwealth and with the world, but they did so, as Amanda said today, recognizing that it was part of his duty and their duty to him. And if I may be allowed a personal remark, as Sonny approached the end, I held his hand. And before he died, I was privileged to kiss that hand, which had done so much to make the Commonwealth and the world a better place. He fulfilled the prophetic words of the Reverend C.F. Andrews when he was still a baby. He lived a long and rewarding life, and we were the beneficiaries of it. Thank you all.
Well, Ron, I think we knew that your speech would be masterful and that it would be scholarly, it would be perceptive, and it would be stirring. But you have kept the whole room wrapped by your words and by the meaning behind your words. And that is a rare gift. And we thank you so much for that today. But I think you've stirred many memories, but you have also opened many dimensions of Sonny's long life. And I think we have half an hour for questions. And so if I could ask, I think we've got some people with roving mics. And if we have an overflow room, I haven't looked, but if there is one, I hope we've got a connection there. So in asking your questions, could I ask you to identify yourself with any kind of description you wish? And could I also ask you to be brief in your questions so that we can get through as many as possible? So I'm going to ask Ron to come forward. Can I have the first question, please? Mark. Thank you.
For those who don't know, I'm Mark Robinson. I was working for the UN Secretary General in his private office for 4 years when the American Under Secretary General brought Sonny into my office. Sonny asked me to do something. He asked me to get observer status for the Commonwealth at the UN. When I saw him a few weeks later, I said, Sonny, he asked me how long would it take? I said, 10 years. He said, I want it by this General Assembly. I said, and you can have it. He said, how? He said, well, if you've got a team, fill in the application now, because Yasser Arafat and the PLO are getting observer status, and Waldheim is desperate to have someone else. Ron, you have opened so many memories. You mentioned the Mecca. And that is fantastic because of your diplomatic experience, your friendship. When I was working for Sonny, you were always very friendly towards me. And I'm just going to say one final thing. And that is that I've worked for many people, including the Foreign Secretary, blah, 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 blah. But the 6 years I worked for Sonny were the highlight of my career. So thank you today. I'm not asking a question. I'm just saying thank you for reminding us what a wonderful person Sir Sridhar Ramphal was.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Is there a question, please? Over here.
I'm just wondering if by the time this reaches socials and perhaps
I'm
the
not hearing you.
minds-
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, I'm just wondering if by the time it arrives on the socials and the young people of the Caribbean and the Commonwealth would tune into whatever they can just from this event, what would Sonny, if you can say, tell his 21-year-old self? Thank you.
It is a very good question. But Sonny played a great deal of importance on youth. Remember, the youth program within the Secretariat was started on the Sonny Ramphal. Why? Because he knew people like him, people like me, wouldn't be around forever. We are going to have to deliver this Commonwealth to young people who have passion about it, who are committed to it, and who want to carry it on. If we do not involve young people in the Commonwealth, if we do not make the Commonwealth relevant to them, then it will not be sustained. So at all times, the Commonwealth must look for ways in which it can engage the young. And, engaging the young is not, as people like to believe, it's all about pop or whatever. Young people are interested in social issues too. Recognize that they use social media more than anyone else. It is young people who use social media. It is my great niece and her cousin who are using social media every day to communicate with each other, to communicate ideas to each other, to make protests about what older generations are doing or have done every day. So the techniques that we use in the Commonwealth to how to reach those people has to change. We ourselves have to go to where they are talking in order to talk to them. But the message we must give them must be the messages that every young person wants to hear. What are you doing for this generation? How can I look forward to getting a job, or more than that, to starting a business? How can I make myself independent in the world? How can I look forward to getting married and having a home and raising a family? Where is that money coming from? And with all that's happening in the world, including the introduction of artificial intelligence, which more and more we are hearing is dislodging, I don't know if it's true, but I hear it's dislodging early entrance people into jobs. And young people are early entrant people into jobs. How are we going to balance the progress of artificial intelligence with needs of young people? All of these are issues. I don't pretend to know the answers. But I know that one of the things I would do is to take something out of Sonny's playbook, set up a group of experts, which must include young people, must also include the creators of artificial intelligence and social programs, and ask them, how can we get young people involved in the work of this organization? That's what I would do. And I think that's what Sonny would do.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie, for that question. Arif and then Carl.
Thank you. Arif Zaman, to the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, where I'm a PhD student still. So I want to ask a question really brings together two things, Sir Ron. I mean, your comments about Sonny Ramphal and the Ottawa Chog, and actually the comments that he made to you, Stuart, I think if I'm correct, Sue, in the oral history project, the interview that he gave to you, where at the end of that interview, Sir Sonny seemed to be a bit regretful that the focus on his work on South Africa somewhat obscured and overshadowed the work he did on debt and development. So my question is simply this: do you think that can you elaborate a little bit on how you think he saw the significance of that work, his work particularly on development, economic development, debt, of course, you highlighted at the Ottawa, in the context of an evolving Commonwealth in that period, which for many countries, as you know, Sir Ron, some countries were still getting their independence in the 70s, into the 80s. You were still very young, relatively young organization. So the question is, how much importance did he attach to the issues around democracy and development, not just as the Ottawa Chogam, but indeed for the economic future of the Commonwealth?
Well, those who try to divorce development from democracy or development from human rights make a fundamental error. First of all, there can be no human rights and no democracy without development. You can't ask hungry people to go and vote. You can't ask them to accept the principle of democracy, of parliaments, and the division of authority when they cannot feed themselves. You cannot ask them to do that when they don't know how they will feed their children if they happen to be adults. So there can be no divorcing of development from these issues. And I think Sonny always saw it in that holistic way. These things are intertwined. They must develop on a parallel path. None must allow the other to suffer. Democracy is important. Rights are important. The rule of law is important. Justice is important. Social justice as well as economic justice. But at the same time, we have to keep alive law, the rule of law and international law, because at the end of the day, even if you are poor, you depend upon the law to ensure that you are not exploited or that your vulnerabilities are not made worse. So I think you would find that he would say that, and that what he tried to do in the Commonwealth, through the use of the Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation, which to his eternal credit was started by Arnold Smith. But the question was always balance. That is why he set up the expert groups on development, why he set up the expert groups on looking at the world financial architecture, to how we could achieve greater equity amongst the countries of the world, so that we don't have a situation that both within societies in the Commonwealth and between societies, the gap between the rich and the poor becomes so great that you are fomenting revolution. So I think that's the long answer to your question, but I hope it satisfies you.
I'm going to call Carl next, and then I think there was a question just in front of you. Carl.
Yes, thank you. Carl Wright. Sonny Ramphal was a tremendous inspiration to me personally and my generation, and I think I can document that. I was very lucky that I actually had him as my boss at the Secretariat, and then of course later with the Mecca. But before that, I was interacting with him quite a lot, particularly on the issue of South Africa, black trade unions, and employment and labor issues. And I have a wonderful a wonderful black and white photograph of Sonny sitting in a conference, very relaxed in Geneva, where he's giving tremendous support and inspiration in some of the initiatives we were doing. But the specific question I've got, Sir Ron, is more an up-to-date one. I personally am very ashamed that this government, okay, has slashed overseas development assistance, along with many other major donors in Europe, and of course, to say nothing of America and the scandalous disbanding of US aid. If Sonny was alive today, what do you think would he say to Keir Starmer and to the European other leaders about the importance of restoring overseas aid to its rightful place?
Well, I think he would be concerned about any cutting of aid to vulnerable countries, to the least developed countries, to the ones that really do need the aid, particularly when you consider the colonial history of these countries that helped them to reach the position of decline in which they are. So he would think that certain countries had an obligation to those countries to try to lift them out of their poverty. Certainly not to make people, not to allow people to starve. Not poverty and hunger are still today's two biggest crises apart from climate change. You will not feel it in Britain, though there is poverty and hunger here. There is poverty and hunger here. There is poverty and hunger in the United States of America. But, you know, a country like mine, it doesn't matter to me that Britain has reduced its aid because we didn't get it anyhow. And the United States of America, this is a fact. I'm not denying, I'm not decrying President Trump. I'm merely stating a fact that you all know. President Trump has applied tariffs on everybody's goods entering into the United States, everybody. We've all got a 10% tariff, in some cases higher. If you happen to be Chinese, well, I'm sorry for you. But the point is, he's applied tariffs everywhere. What has he done by doing that? A country like mine. Because we are in the neighborhood and we can't move. We can't pick up the house and take it somewhere else. We are trapped in America. We are trapped in the Americas. And the United States of America is the dominant power. But all of our trading relationships, logistically and in every other way, is tied to the United States. We can buy food and goods cheaper out of Miami than we can buy it from any place else. So as of choice, we buy from the United States. But what are we buying today? Today, we are buying all the tariffs that President Trump has put on everybody else's goods. So it's not just a question of the 10% he's put on us. It's a question of the percentages he's put on everybody else, because everybody else's goods have gone up. And we are buying those goods from Miami. So if something used to cost $5 before April the 3rd of this year in Antigua, as a result of those tariffs, cost $5, it's now $25. Now you figure, what does that mean in a country where the salaries are chasing prices of that kind? It just can't happen. And at some point, unless we find collectively some way in the Caribbean of diverting our trade away from the United States, so maybe we start doing something which would have been unheard of some time ago, trading with our neighbors, Latin America and Central America, where we could get the same goods cheaper, our people are going to face such a horrendous increase in their cost of living that they will not be able to survive. Governments will topple. And if opposition parties coming into office don't have the answer, they will topple too. So we are into a period of instability. So I think I'm telling you this, my country does not need. What we need is access to concessional financing. We don't want charity. We want access to loans we can afford, affordable loans that we can pay back. Now, Mr. Trump and the Canadians tell us in the Caribbean, as I'm sure they're telling people in Africa as well, don't deal with the Chinese. All they're doing is lending you money so they can grab the assets later when you can't pay the bill. That's the message. Don't deal with the Chinese. Well, here's the reality of it. My country has a hurricane, damages the whole country. We apply to the World Bank and the IMF for a loan. to repair? And the answer is you don't qualify. And why do we not qualify? Because they say we have a per capita income that makes us a middle income country. And therefore, it doesn't matter that your country is in ruins and that you are not generating any money. You are on our books a middle income country, therefore we're not giving you any loans. Not loans, not even loan. I'm not talking about aid, not even loans. So what do? The Chinese offer us the loan to rebuild the place, 20-year money, 2% interest. Would you turn your back on that money? Not if your country is at stake. Not for any principle that the United States or Canada or anybody else has. You take that money because it's the difference between your people starving and your people progressing. So that's the reality of our situation. That's why I said earlier that if the Commonwealth heads of government were to meet, that elephant in the room, they can't get away from. The rivalry between that America has created with China, that's trying to force the rest of the world not to deal with China, when China is doing more for developing countries than they are, and they expect us to abandon China. It cannot happen, not in realistic economic terms. We may have to find some other way of dealing with cybersecurity and the allegations that China is listening into everything you do. But guess what? In the United States, in my embassy, I assume that everybody is listening to my conversations every minute of the day. And it doesn't trouble me. I operate on the basis that this is, if you come and ask me, I tell you. You don't have to listen to the conversation. But I say that as a joke. But the point is, that's the reality of our situation. So what would Sonny do? He would condemn the fact that aid to the most vulnerable is being denied. But I do not think that he would argue that certain countries that have passed the threshold where aid is needed should continue to ask for it. I will never for the life of me understand why Israel is the biggest beneficiary of American aid, unless it is for some purpose I cannot see. Or maybe I am seeing, but I don't want to actually utter the words. So aid is a tool, not for the beneficiary. It's not for the recipient, it's for the giver. The person who's giving the aid has a purpose behind giving the aid. When they slash it, it is also weaponizing aid. You use aid as a weapon to get something else that you want. Our countries in the South, if I'm to blame them for anything, it is for their own lack of unity. Because if the countries of the South would get together on issues of trade and investment and begin to take control of their own economic future, they might have a better chance than permanently putting their hand out.
Okay, now there was a question for the back, which Terry, if you don't mind, I'll come to you after, because this side of the room has done very well. So we'll just ask for a question from the back and then come back to Terry.
Thank you, Ron.
You've lost a lot of hair since last I saw you. Welcome to the club.
Oh, yeah. Struggling. Yes, thanks again for educating us in such a profound and scholarly way about the achievements of a great man. I just want to add a footnote and a brief footnote. You spoke about Sonny's capacity for incredibly hard work. And I just want people here to know that to understand that, you have to understand the family from which Sonny comes. And as you know, I've written a little bit about this. I just point to two things. One, his great-grandmother, who was an indentured laborer, twice, once to Dutch Guyana and the second time to British Guyana. Both times she went there with her son alone, no other member of the family. And that son was Sonny's grandfather, who became a very famous educationist. I also like to point out that those two periods of indentureship with her son was split in the middle by a return to India, where she was rejected by her family because she had crossed the Kalapani, the dark waters, and they thought she was polluted, and there was no way they could accept her back into her family. And that is the context in which she then re-indentured to British Guyana, going back with her son. So that's one aspect. That tells you something about Sonny's passion, his fight for injustice, his capacity for hard work. And the other thing is, speaking of hard work, his father, J.I. Rampal, people didn't realize this, but for nearly 10 years, he had one of the most enlightening and comprehensive columns, a whole page in the broadsheet, first of all in the Daily Chronicle and the New Daily Chronicle in the late 20s and early 30s. Now, every week on Sundays, how he found the time, because it's an education. I spent nearly a year reading these things. It was an incredible education for me. But I was always asking the question, how did he find the time to do all the things he was doing and having a full-time job and still produce this thing without fail every Sunday? I don't want to go on and give a lecture here now. But I think just these 2 points throw a little bit of light on Sonny's capacity for hard work, his integrity, and his passion for fighting for the rights of the underdog. Thank you.
Well, in response to that, if I may, Professor Secretariat has spent years researching the simple sentences that he has just spoken. Years. And his scholarship is remarkable. His research, meticulous. Everything and every word he just spoke was absolutely true. But it just shows you that people, because they were indentured from India or brought as slaves from Africa, that does not mean that they're stupid. It means that their economic circumstances were such that they either had to move or were moved someplace else to find survival. They overcame their difficulties in 3 generations, but in 2 generations, Sonny's father became a teacher, a headmaster, an education. He broke ground in many things. He was the first chief labor officer in Guyana, first non-white man sent out from Britain to become the chief labor officer to handle the industrial relations of the country. He also, and this is his great-granddaughters, admire him to this day. They're both teachers. Actually, 3 of them. Are you the great-great-granddaughter? So also a teacher. That education was the key to progress, to freedom. And he insisted at a time in Guyana when girls were not allowed to go to school because parents didn't want their daughters mixing with boys in schools, Indian parents, or they kept the children at home so that they were free labor, either in the household or on the farm. Girls were not allowed. He introduced, first thing he did in Parliament as a legislature, what came to be known as the Swetnam Circular, because he persuaded the governor to issue what would be called today a decree, insisting that girls had a right to education that had to be honored by their parents. And that freed a whole generation of women in Guyana to themselves become professionals. So he did all that too, but these were lessons that were passed down through the family. In my own case, my grandfather was an indentured laborer. In 2 generations, from his being an indentured laborer to mine, everybody in the family had master's degrees. Everybody had a professional. And in my own case, I was knighted by the Queen twice. So, with not an indictment on my grandfather. So thank you, Clem, for that.
Terry has been very patient. So could we have Terry next, please? No, shout into the microphone.
My name is Terence Dormer, and thank you, Sir Ron, for an absolutely brilliant lecture. Wonderful in every way. Now, my question is a simple one of great complexity.
I'm not surprised.
Of all the problems in the modern world which are rooted in British colonialism, nothing is more currently horrible than the situation in the Middle East, particularly Palestine. Do you think Sonny Ramphal would have approved of the idea of Commonwealth membership for Palestine and then work to perhaps have Commonwealth membership for a truly democratic, excellently governed state of Israel?
Well, I think the answer to that question lies in historical evidence. There are members of the Secretariat, when Sonny was there, who worked with him. Stuart, Mark, Hugh. In looking through Sonny's papers, which I've been doing time and again now for one reason or another, I found a request in which he asked somebody to produce a paper on Palestine. I don't know if any of the three of you were involved in that at the time. But so the answer to your question, I'm sorry?
I didn't know that he asked.
Yeah. So the answer to your question, Terry, is he had already begun to think about that idea long before this conflict occurred. He also, because he figured Palestine in the Commonwealth would force Britain to deal with it. It would also force other powers to deal with it, including Canada, the neighbor of the United States, in a very key relationship, strategic relationship. So in asking for that paper, I think he had already begun to think about the idea. But as you know, as well as I do, the Middle East is an ever-changing, fluid, volatile situation. Whether the moment ever arose when he felt he could turn that into something that would work, I don't know. But he was always a very careful man. He had bright ideas and he had great initiatives. But as I told you, first question he asked, do you have support? Can you take this forward? And if he didn't think that was there, then he knew it would not work. But I would think he would certainly be concerned about it. And it would be part of what would be uppermost in his mind at this particular time. Not to bring them into the Commonwealth, but to see what the Commonwealth could do.
Yes, that proposal came up before heads of government, as you will recall, Terry, 5 years later in the retreat at in Gleneagles, not Gleneagles, St Andrews. Peter Williams.
Thank you very much. Peter Williams. I was Director of Education in Sonny Ramphal's time and worked a good deal with him on the tricky issues of Commonwealth student mobility, but also the creation, setting up of the Commonwealth of Learning, which of course is a significant part of his ongoing legacy to the Commonwealth. Very much in keeping with Sir Ronald's remarks just now, he was passionately committed to education cooperation in the Commonwealth and referred to it himself as jewel in the Commonwealth crown, and something that he wrote in the early part of this century. But my question to you actually isn't about education, devoted to that as I am. When we look back in Sonny's time, the Commonwealth leaders were in very many cases the founding presidents at independence of their countries, and they were very long-serving people, and the Commonwealth was, by the time he completed his term, was a little bit smaller than it is now. I can't remember the exact number of countries when he came in and when he left. But I just wonder whether you could speculate or whether Sonny himself ever commented to you on the passage of time and the fact that whether he had any thoughts about overcoming the formalism that can come when you have a Commonwealth with a larger membership and presidents who may be voted out of office within 3 or 5 years, and how you can cope with the Commonwealth's huge asset in his time of the informality and the camaraderie that developed between people who knew each other. I mean, his successors as Secretary General have had a really difficult problem confronting them. He managed the issues that he had at the time and the set of leaders that he had at the time with absolute brilliance. Did he ever comment at all on how the modern Commonwealth can combat formalism and can recreate this atmosphere of informal dialogue between Commonwealth leaders who often don't know each other at all?
Well, let me say two things about that. Before I come to the question of how you deal with a Commonwealth heads of government meeting that has lost its informality simply because it has grown so large. In the days when it was 6 Commonwealth leaders, even in the days when it was 14, that ease of conversation and frankness would have been much more easier than a group of 56. In fact, my own views of a group of 56 cannot have an intimate conversation. Their group is too large and the time it would take too long. Possible, but can't be done in half a day, which is what effectively retreats have become now in the Chogams. That's why I said earlier that the retreats, Commonwealth as a government meeting should be that. Not anybody else, not long communiques, not anything, just them trying to talk. It's one way of approaching the problem of 56. But in reality, you know, the Commonwealth needs to ask itself a couple of questions. And that is, does it want to continue to expand its membership? Should expansion, should widening be at the expense of deepening? And when you ask countries into the Commonwealth that do not share the history and the culture and the laws of the original Commonwealth members and those who came from out of the remnants of British Empire, are you doing the right thing? This is not a question for me. I'll write about it as a free commentator, but I think it's a question that has to seriously be considered. You also have to consider about how you get some intimacy into heads of governments meetings so that they're more frank, so they're more honest, and so that they're dealing with that question. And perhaps part of the answer is that we have to start to have selective meetings in between Chogams, depending on what the issue is of the day. What is the issue of moment? Could we have a heads of government meeting that is restricted to the region that has a particular difficulty, so that those countries, with a selected number of other countries that wish to be part of it, to have that meeting and to bring the conclusions of that meeting to the wider heads of government meeting later? If that's not a more effective way of doing it, then all gathering together and reading speeches with each other. Because for sure, those speeches tell you what the national problem is. What it doesn't tell you is how the Commonwealth can help to resolve it. So mechanisms have to be found. And I think Sunny would want to be inventive enough to look at how you could deal with this problem without having people feel that their voice was left out of the discussion. It's by no means easy. It'll call for creative solutions, but you put your finger on a very difficult problem, and one that we will have to address if the Commonwealth's discussions among its heads are really to have the same quality and the same effectiveness as they were when they were a smaller group and could be more frank with each other. You know, I looked at Nicholas Mansurge's book, his review of Commonwealth affairs, and I read the most shocking statement by Malan, the leader of South Africa, which was a dominion at the time. and he had an equal voice with all the others. And people were talking about the admission of African nations to the Commonwealth. And he said, in plain words, I do not believe that I could invite to my country some of the people you want to invite into the Commonwealth now. Plain words. But that was a foreshadowing of what was to come in South Africa. Well, not come, it was already in place. But at least it was foreshadowed how other leaders might have reacted to it. But the importance, however, it was at that meeting that the Canadian leader took on South Africa and said, we will not put up with this. White Canada talking to white South Africa. We will not put up with this. So there is great importance for leaders to be able to talk together in a frank way. It cannot be beyond our creativity to find ways in which those conversations can take place without people feeling that they were left out, even if it were to happen in small groups and the results of the small groups to be brought to the larger ones. But I want to say one thing to you at a personal level. Sonny had great regard for all that you did in education, and I want you to know that. When the Vice Chancellor of the University of London set up the committee, which Malcolm Rifkind headed, and I worked on with him on the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, I said to Sonny, we've got to find some experts to advise us on this. First name he called was yours. That was his first recommendation. Speak to you. And as you know, we did speak to you. And we did ask for your advice. And your advice was very valuable and taken on board by the committee that eventually recommended strongly to the Vice Chancellor that the Institute of Commonwealth Studies must stand. So I just wanted you to know that for what it is worth to you. I know it was important to him.
Well, we have overrun our time, and there is a cool drink awaiting. So if there are no other urgent questions, I'm going to finish now the question time. How many people really want to ask one more question? There is one more question. We'll have one more question from Nicholas.
Saran, thank you. It's a high risk putting my hand up there. But you've, in a wonderful overview, you mentioned the institutional innovations that Sonny introduced. You also early on mentioned the 90-odd Commonwealth accredited organizations and their role. And I wonder what you think he might advise in terms of an institutional innovation that would better include the voice of those organizations and mobilize their resources in a collective support for Commonwealth initiatives. And I think we had the high-level group report in 2018, which had some recommendations which haven't been implemented. And I wonder what you think he might have advised.
Well, first of all, I think it's sad that we commission people to deliver reports and then we ignore the reports. It's a complete waste of the Commonwealth's money. And somebody ought to be held accountable for the fact that we spend money on reports and then ignore them. Now, of course, recommendations from committees are not political documents, not until governments look at them and endorse them. But their content is important and it has political implications. This Commonwealth is not now financially an institution that is resourced well enough to do the work that it has to do. I gather, though I have to admit, in the last 8 years, I've deliberately not paid a lot of attention to what the Secretariat has been doing. But as I gather, there are cuts being made now in Commonwealth programs, making this place less effective than it used to be, in a number of areas. And that's sad. Because this is not a time to be mean with the Commonwealth if you want the Commonwealth to mean something. It's a time for people to step up. But I also know it is difficult for governments to step up because they're all on the strain, all. But there are some core things that we cannot neglect. And that is why I believe heads of government have to decide what the priorities are for the intergovernmental relationship. What is it governments must do together? Allocate the resources for that and work on it. And it cannot be that education is one of the areas that we want to neglect. Because education has never been more important than it is now. Particularly if we want to keep young people involved, enlightened, and educated themselves to make decisions. The thing I would say about the non-governmental organizations and civil society is this. The Commonwealth can no longer just look to governments to finance its operations. The Secretariat cannot do that. It has to start looking outside at multinational companies, at companies that operate in the Commonwealth as a whole and make money out of it, and ask them to make some kind of contribution to the operations of this place, because they're being kept alive by the purchases of people in each Commonwealth country. That incidentally includes the people who run the internet, who run Facebook, who run all of these other social things, that some of which I don't know. But all of them depend on money that they raise from ordinary people. And one would have thought that it is not beyond the realm of possibility that if approaches are made to them by the Commonwealth Secretariat to say, these are programs we have, here's a menu of them. Can you pick which ones you think you could support and provide the funding? In terms of the administration of these programs, we would even give you a seat on the board so that you could know that your money is well spent and it's not being diverted to something else. But we have to look outside of the intergovernmental system because the governments don't have the money. Of course, they have the money if they stop spending it on some of the things they spend it on. Well, they will tell you that those things are important. So I don't know that we need another missile, frankly. I don't know that we need another bomb head. I think one is enough. But in any event, all of this thinking has to happen and these discussions have to take place. Somebody has to mobilize it.
Well, thank you for that last question, Nicholas. And thank you, Ron, for all your answers to those questions. Ron, if you'd like to take a seat, and I'm going to call finally upon a fellow countryman of Sonny's, Ricky Sankar, to give the vote of thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Sir Ron and Lady Sanders, Secretary General, she's left, distinguished guests, and members of the Commonwealth Association. Sir Ron, I have a pen, but I don't have the expertise to draft a vote of thanks. When a child is born, the brain starts to function until such time as you have to give a vote of thanks. So I've made some notes. It is with gratitude that I take the opportunity to propose the vote of thanks to our distinguished lecturer on this, the 5th Patsy Robertson Memorial Lecture. It is very appropriate that Sir Ron should have been asked to make this presentation on the legacy of Sir Sonny Ramphal because he knew him better than most. Professionally, as High Commissioner in London of Antigua and Barbuda in the 1980s, he worked with Sonny, not least on the long campaign against apartheid in South Africa. Later, Ron had a number of important high-level Commonwealth assignments. Privately, of course, Ron is part of the Ramphal family, married to Susan, and a source of advice and support to Sonny over a great many years. Ron has set about his task with the eloquence and the scholarship that we have come to expect. He has spoken of Sonny's international as well as his Commonwealth legacy. But his speech also reminded us of Sonny's Caribbean roots and his lifelong devotion to the unity and the well-being of the Caribbean region. That driving motivation was with him until the end. That Caribbean dimension is also a reminder of Patsy Robertson, who we commemorate with this annual lecture. Patsy was a friend and close colleague of Sonny. She was his official spokesperson throughout his years as Secretary General and rarely left his side. She would have wanted us to honor her former boss in the way we have today and would have been delighted by how many have wanted to attend. Many tributes have been paid by former staff members living in the UK and abroad, as well as by those who knew him or worked with him in other fields. If you were fortunate to have attended this morning's memorial service, you will have seen several of the key links to those tributes and obituaries alongside some glorious photographs. However, it would be remiss of me if I did not add my reflection of the man whom I've known for over 45 years, professionally and a friend, even after we had both left the Secretariat. I spent 22 enjoyable years in the Secretariat under 3 Secretaries General, of which 11 years were under the leadership, his leadership. For me, he was a unique person, a family man, easy to associate with, a mentor, hospitable, and very generous. He was one of the most outstanding international statesmen to have come out of Guyana, a comparatively small country by population. It was heartening that he was accorded a state funeral with his ashes lying in the place of heroes in the Botanical Gardens in Georgetown. He has left a legacy which will long endure. In a similar vein, Patsy remained a colleague and a good friend of mine up to her last days. She was the driving force behind the establishment of the Commonwealth Association, and apart from this annual lecture, is also memorialized by a tree planted in her memory, which is flourishing in the gardens of Marlborough House. Many thanks to all the family members who have been able to attend today. Finally, I would like to thank our Secretary General, and this message could be passed on, for her generosity and support in making this event possible. Also, the assiduous and meticulous devotion over many months of Stuart Mole, David Blake, and other colleagues in bringing this day to fruition. Thank you all for your support.